31,000 feet over the heartland. Flight 101 is cruising through a clear afternoon sky with 164 souls aboard. And none of them know yet that the calmest voice they've heard all flight, the one that welcomed them aboard 20 minutes ago with an easy laugh about the tailwind shaving 10 minutes off their arrival, is about to come screaming out of the cockpit with a fury none of them have ever seen from a captain in uniform. In row 9, a 6-year-old girl in a denim jacket with an airline wings pin stuck crookedly to the lapel is jolted awake, gasping, both hands flying to her scalded chest, a paper cup rolling empty across the tray table in front of her, dark coffee already soaking through her jacket and into the seat cushion beneath her. Standing over her in the aisle, arms still raised from the shove that knocked the cup from the child's own small hands, is a woman in an ivory pantsuit, sunglasses shoved up into overprocessed blonde hair, already talking, already loud, already explaining to anyone who will listen that the girl shouldn't have had her tray table out like that, and that this is clearly not her fault. What she does not know, what she is about to find out in the ugliest possible way, is that the girl she just burned is not simply an unaccompanied minor traveling with a flight attendant escort 3 rows back. She is the daughter of the man currently flying this exact aircraft, and in exactly 4 minutes, when that flight attendant reaches the cockpit door and relays what just happened to the captain over a private interphone line, this entire flight is going to change, because the man behind the yoke of Flight 101 is not going to sit calmly through the rest of this journey pretending he didn't just hear his own daughter's scream carried down the aisle. 6 hours earlier, before any of this began, the story starts the way these stories always do, in the ordinary chaos of an airport terminal that has no idea what it's about to host. Priscilla and Dunmore, 53 years old, 3 times divorced, a woman who describes herself to strangers within the first 90 seconds of meeting them as someone who simply expects a certain standard, is standing at the gate counter loudly disputing a seat assignment she insists was supposed to be an aisle. She travels constantly, mostly to visit a sister she doesn't get along with and a timeshare she resents paying for, and she has cultivated, over decades of minor frustrations, a genuinely impressive skill for making every inconvenience someone else's fault. She has already told the gate agent, a soft-spoken young woman named Farah who has learned to keep her face perfectly neutral no matter what comes out of a passenger's mouth, that she is a very frequent flyer with this airline, a claim contradicted almost immediately by the fact that her loyalty number, when Farah pulls it up, shows exactly 6 flights in 3 years, none of them requiring any particular fuss. Priscilla huffs, snatches her boarding pass back before Farah finishes explaining the seat map, and stalks off toward the gate seating area muttering that someone is going to hear about this. At the same gate, in the special assistant's seating near the jet bridge door, sits a 6-year-old girl named Maddox Ellery Cortland, though everyone who knows her just calls her Maddie, swinging her sneakers back and forth off the edge of a chair too big for her, clutching a stuffed airplane with one wing chewed soft from years of anxious travel. Beside her, though not seated with her, stands a flight attendant named Odalise Ferreira, off-duty for this leg but flying as a positioning crew member and asked, informally, by the flight's operating crew to keep an eye on Maddie during boarding as a professional courtesy, the kind of quiet favor crew extend to each other's families whenever schedules force a captain's child to travel as an unaccompanied minor on their own parents' flight rather than sit up front with them, which federal safety regulation strictly forbids regardless of who's in the cockpit. Maddie is small for her age, missing her 2 front teeth, wearing a denim jacket with an airline wings pin clipped slightly crooked to the collar, a gift from her father on her very first flight 3 years ago that she has worn on every single trip since like a good luck charm. She is flying to visit her grandmother for a week while her father works this route, a routine she has done a dozen times before, always excited, always a little nervous, always comforted by the knowledge that even though she can't sit beside him, he is close, right up there past a locked door, and that makes every flight feel safe in a way nothing else quite does. The man behind that locked door is Captain Desmond Cortland, 44 years old, 16 years with this airline, a widower for the past 2 years since Maddie's mother passed after a long illness, a man who has rebuilt an entire fragile architecture of single fatherhood around flight schedules, layovers, and the extraordinary kindness of a crew community that has quietly looked out for his little girl every time duty forces them apart mid-trip. He does not advertise his personal life to passengers. To the cabin, he is simply the captain, a calm voice over the PA, a name on a name tag glimpsed briefly at the cockpit door during boarding, nothing more. But to the people who fly with him regularly, To Odalise and to the first officer settling into the right seat beside him, Cortland's devotion to his daughter is the quiet, steady center of who he is, the reason he took this particular route in the first place, because it lets him fly with her aboard, close enough to feel like a father even when regulation keeps them seated apart. Boarding proceeds in its familiar rhythm, families jostling with rollerboards, business travelers ducking past strollers, and Odalise walks Maddie down the jet bridge personally, settling her into row 9, aisle seat, with the specific care of someone who has done this exact routine a dozen times before, buckling her in, tucking her stuffed airplane against her side, promising she'll check on her again once the seatbelt sign goes off. Priscilla Dunmore boards several minutes later, already sour about her middle seat assignment, and settles into 9B directly beside the little girl, sparing her exactly one dismissive glance before pulling out her phone and beginning a loud, one-sided phone call about her sister that continues well past the point when crew ask passengers to silence their devices for departure. The safety briefing plays, the door closes, and Flight 101 pushes back on schedule, climbing out over farmland turning gold in the early afternoon light. Captain Cortland's voice comes over the PA shortly after leveling off, warm, easy, the practiced cadence of a man who genuinely likes this part of the job, welcoming everyone aboard, mentioning the smooth ride ahead, the slight tailwind that should get them in a few minutes early. A small detail that will feel almost cruel in hindsight, because there is no version of this flight that arrives early now, not after what's about to happen 4 rows back from where his own child sits quietly, coloring in a book balanced on her tray table. The first hour passes uneventfully enough, the low hum of engines, the rattle of the beverage cart working its way back through the cabin, Maddie humming quietly to herself as she colors, occasionally glancing toward the front of the plane the way she always does, some instinct telling her which direction her father is even through a locked steel door and 30 feet of aisle. Priscilla, meanwhile, has spent the better part of 40 minutes complaining, first about the seat, then about the lack of legroom, then about the flight attendant's pace refilling her coffee, needling every small interaction with a low-grade hostility that other passengers in earshot have started exchanging glances over. When the beverage cart finally reaches row 9, Priscilla orders a large black coffee, no room for cream, and receives it in a paper cup with a plastic lid that, in her irritation at being served too slowly, she yanks off entirely rather than sipping through, setting the open cup down hard on her own tray table with the particular carelessness of someone who has never once in her life considered that her actions might land on someone else. Maddie, absorbed in her coloring book, reaches for a fresh crayon in the seat pocket in front of her, her small elbow brushing lightly, almost imperceptibly, against the shared armrest between 9A and 9B. It is nothing. It is the kind of accidental contact that happens 100 times an hour on every commercial flight in the sky, forgotten before it's even finished happening. But Priscilla, already primed for outrage by 40 minutes of self-manufactured grievance, snaps her head toward the child and says, sharply, that she needs to keep her hands to herself, a wildly disproportionate response to a 6-year-old's elbow grazing an armrest, delivered loud enough that the row in front turns around. Maddie, startled, apologizes in the small, immediate way children do, shrinking slightly in her seat, and goes quiet, her crayon forgotten in her lap. It should have ended there. It does not. Priscilla, having decided the child is somehow the villain of her afternoon, continues muttering under her breath about parents who don't teach their kids manners, seemingly unaware or unconcerned that Maddie is traveling as an unaccompanied minor with no parent seated anywhere nearby to correct. The comment lands hard on the little girl anyway, and her eyes well up, quiet, private tears she tries to blink away rather than let show. The specific quiet suffering of a child who has learned, at 6 years old, not to make a scene even when she desperately wants comfort. A woman across the aisle in 9D notices, gives Priscilla a sharp look that goes entirely unacknowledged, and reaches into her bag for a tissue to offer the girl, a small kindness that does nothing to defuse what's building in seat 9B. 15 minutes later, as the aircraft hits a short patch of light chop, nothing serious, nothing requiring more than a routine seatbelt sign chime, Priscilla reaches for her coffee at the exact moment the aircraft gives a small, ordinary jolt, and rather than steadying the cup herself, she overcorrects, jerking her arm sideways in irritation and, in doing so, knocks her own elbow against Maddie's small shoulder hard enough that the child's hands, still holding her crayon near the tray table, flinch backward into the open coffee cup itself, and it happens in the space of a single second. The cup tips, The scalding liquid arcs across the narrow gap between the seats and lands squarely across Maddie's chest and the collar of her denim jacket. The very same jacket with her father's wings pin still crookedly attached. And the little girl screams, a real scream, high and startled and full of pain, both hands flying up to the fabric now soaked through and burning against her skin. The cabin around row 9 reacts instantly. The woman in 9D is out of her seatbelt and crouching in the aisle within seconds, calling for a flight attendant. Odalise, 3 rows back, is moving before the second scream even finishes, and reaches Maddie in what feels like no time at all, dropping to her knees, pulling ice from a nearby drink service, pressing a cool cloth gently to the child's collarbone, asking her in a steady, practiced voice to tell her where it hurts most. And Priscilla, rather than showing even a flicker of the horror any decent adult feels upon accidentally injuring a child, straightens in her seat, adjusts her sunglasses and announces to the row and to Odalise directly that she barely touched the girl, that the turbulence did it, that this is clearly not her fault. Her tone already shifting into practiced self-defense rather than concern, a tone that lands on the surrounding passengers like a slap, because every single person within earshot watched exactly what happened, and none of them believe a word of it. Odalise, working quickly to assess the burn, keeps her voice level and professional even as her jaw tightens with barely restrained fury, informing Priscilla flatly that she needs to remain seated while the injured passenger receives care. Priscilla incredibly argues, insisting she has rights as a passenger too, and that she shouldn't be treated like a criminal over an accident. It is at this exact moment, with Maddie whimpering quietly under a cold compress, her denim jacket stained dark and reeking of coffee, that Odalise makes a decision that will detonate this entire flight. She reaches for the nearest interphone handset, dials the cockpit directly, and in a voice she is fighting to keep from shaking, informs the flight deck that there has been a passenger injury in row 9, a burn from spilled coffee, and that the injured passenger is Maddie. There is a beat of silence on the line. Then Captain Cortland's voice comes back, and it is not the warm, easy voice from the boarding announcement. It is flat, controlled, terrifyingly calm in the specific way of a man forcing every ounce of professional discipline he has learned in 16 years of flying to keep himself from coming out of that cockpit right now. He asks, once, whether his daughter is safe and whether the burn requires immediate medical attention beyond first aid. Odalise confirms the burn appears first degree, painful but not severe, no blistering yet visible, and that she is monitoring closely. Cortland thanks her, his voice tight, and asks her to keep him updated every few minutes, and the interphone clicks off, and in the cockpit, the first officer, who has just heard one half of this conversation and pieced together the rest, watches his captain's hands tighten fractionally on the yoke before easing off again. A man visibly and deliberately choosing, second by second, to keep flying this aircraft safely rather than let fury pull his attention from the instruments in front of him. Word moves through the cabin the way it always does, passenger to passenger, in hushed, urgent whispers. By the time the beverage cart makes its second pass 20 minutes later, most of economy already knows 3 things. The little girl in row 9 got burned by coffee spilled by the woman beside her. The woman is loudly insisting it wasn't her fault, and somehow, unbelievably, the little girl is the captain's own daughter, information that spreads a specific electric kind of tension through the cabin. The sense that whatever happens next on this flight is not going to be a routine landing. Priscilla, oblivious to the shifting temperature of the cabin around her, doubles down rather than reading the room, complaining loudly to a flight attendant working the aisle that she shouldn't have to sit next to a crying child for the rest of the flight, and requesting, unbelievably, to be moved away from the very injury she caused. The flight attendant, a veteran named Rosalind Achebe who has flown with Captain Cortland for 9 years and has personally watched him carry his sleeping daughter off red-eye flights more times than she can count, informs Priscilla with icy politeness that there are no available seats to relocate her to and that she is required to remain in her assigned seat for the remainder of the flight. A sentence Priscilla receives with visible, sputtering outrage, though for the first time she seems to sense, distantly, that the ground is shifting beneath her. The first twist arrives roughly 40 minutes later, when Odalise, checking Maddie's burn again and finding it slightly more inflamed than before, quietly requests permission from Rosalind to move the girl to first class, where there is more room, cooler air circulation near the vents, and considerably more distance from Priscilla. Rosalind clears it immediately, and as Maddie is gently helped out of row 9, coffee-stained jacket and all, wings pins still crookedly attached, several passengers spontaneously applaud, a small, spontaneous show of support that makes the little girl's chin wobble all over again, though this time from the unexpected kindness rather than pain. Priscilla, watching the child be escorted away to better accommodations while she remains stuck exactly where she is, mutters something about special treatment. A comment overheard by no fewer than 6 passengers and immediately, quietly, unanimously despised. The second twist lands even harder. As the aircraft continues its cruise, the first officer, monitoring instruments while Captain Cortland deals with the emotional weight of the last hour, receives a routine air traffic control handoff and, following standard operating procedure to keep the captain informed of all cockpit business regardless of personal matters, mentions, almost in passing, that their current routing puts them within easy reach of a divert airport should the injury warrant it. Cortland, jaw tight, says quietly that he doesn't think it will come to that Maddie is being well cared for, but that he wants Rosalind or Odalise to tell him immediately, no hesitation, if her condition changes even slightly. It is a small moment, unheard by any passenger, but it establishes, definitively, in the eyes of the 2 professionals sharing that cockpit with him, exactly how close this captain is to making an extraordinary decision if his daughter's safety requires it, regulation and schedule be damned. An hour later, the cabin experiences its second major escalation, when Priscilla, increasingly aware of the cold shoulder radiating from every seat around her, attempts to salvage her image by loudly recounting her version of events to a passenger across the aisle, insisting that Maddie grabbed for the cup herself. A claim that contradicts what at least 4 separate passengers, including the woman in 9D, personally witnessed and are now, quietly, writing down in their phones as informal statements, sensing, correctly, that this incident is not going to end with a simple apology. One passenger, a man in row 11 who happens to be an off-duty paramedic, has already gone forward once to check on Maddie's burn personally at Odalise's request, confirming it is being properly treated but recommending she see a doctor upon arrival given the size of the affected area, information that is relayed immediately, gently, to the cockpit, and that lands on Captain Cortland with the full, controlled weight of a father forcing himself not to leave his post. It is this piece of information, more than anything else, that becomes the turning point of the flight, because federal aviation regulation is unambiguous on this exact scenario. An in-flight medical situation involving a minor, especially one recommended for post-flight medical evaluation, gives the captain full authority to declare a medical emergency and adjust the flight plan accordingly if he determines it serves passenger welfare and safety, authority that exists independent of whose daughter is involved, though no one aboard doubts for a second that Cortland's decision in the next several minutes is going to be shaped by both his professional judgment and every fiber of his fatherhood at once. He confers briefly with the first officer, contacts dispatch, and after weighing the burn's severity against the time remaining to their scheduled destination, makes the call. Rather than push through the final 90 minutes to their original arrival city, he requests priority handling to divert to the nearest suitable airport with immediate medical services waiting on the ground, a decision that is entirely within regulation, entirely justified by the paramedics' on-scene assessment, and, entirely, unmistakably, also the decision of a father who is not going to fly 1 extra mile with his injured daughter in the back of the plane if he can help it. The announcement comes over the PA in Cortland's voice, steadier now, but with something unmistakably different underneath it, informing passengers that the flight will be diverting to the nearest airport due to a medical situation involving a young passenger requiring evaluation, that ground medical personnel will be waiting upon arrival, and that he thanks everyone for their patience and understanding. He does not mention that the young passenger is his daughter. He does not need to. By now, virtually the entire cabin already knows, and the announcement is met not with the usual passenger groan at a diversion delay, but with a ripple of quiet, approving nods, the unmistakable sense of an entire aircraft full of strangers silently agreeing that this captain is doing exactly the right thing. Priscilla, for her part, seems to finally grasp, somewhere over the descent into the diversion airport, the size of the consequences bearing down on her. She attempts, weakly, to soften her earlier statements to the flight attendants, claiming she feels terrible about the accident and hopes everyone can just move on. A transparent pivot that fools absolutely no one who witnessed her behavior over the preceding 2 hours. Rosalind informs her, with the flat professionalism of someone who has stopped extending any grace at all, that the airline's incident report will include statements from multiple passenger witnesses, the paramedics' assessment and crew observations, and that further action regarding her conduct will be determined by the airline and, potentially, by the family of the injured minor. The aircraft touches down at the diversion airport to a tarmac already staged with a waiting ambulance, its lights turning silently in the afternoon sun, and ground personnel moving with the brisk, practiced urgency of a team that has done exactly this kind of unscheduled arrival before. As the aircraft taxis toward the gate, passengers can see, through the windows, a small cluster of paramedics and an airline operations supervisor already positioned near the jet bridge, waiting. What none of the passengers can see yet, though several have already begun filming, sensing correctly that something extraordinary is about to unfold, is that Captain Cortland, the moment the aircraft reaches the gate and the parking brake is set, does something he has never once done in 16 years of flying. He leaves the first officer to handle the shutdown checklist alone, unbuckles and walks out of the cockpit himself, in full uniform, epaulets and captain's stripes catching the cabin light, directly down the aisle toward first class, where his daughter sits wrapped in a blanket with a cooling compress against her collar, and the entire cabin, every single passenger still in their seats waiting to deplane, watches in complete silence as he kneels in the aisle, pulls his little girl into his arms and holds her, uniform and all, while she buries her coffee-stained jacket into his shoulder and cries, finally, the tears she'd been holding back for 2 straight hours. It is the single most viewed 40 seconds of footage to come out of this flight, uploaded within minutes by no fewer than 6 different passengers, all capturing some angle of the same moment. A captain still in full uniform, kneeling in the aisle of his own aircraft, holding his injured daughter while paramedics wait just beyond the jet bridge, and an entire cabin of strangers watches in reverent, teary silence. Priscilla Dunmore, 3 rows back in coach, watches this unfold along with everyone else, and for the first time all flight, she says absolutely nothing at all. The paramedics board within minutes of the door opening, gently assessing Maddie's burn, confirming it is first degree with some second-degree blistering beginning at the worst point of contact, painful, requiring dressing and follow-up care, but not life-threatening, a relief that visibly moves through Cortland's shoulders as he hears it, though it does nothing to soften the look on his face when, minutes later, an airline operations supervisor boards the aircraft to begin formally documenting the incident and informs him, quietly, that the passenger in 9B has been identified as the individual responsible for the spill, information Cortland receives with the terrifying, controlled stillness of a man who has spent 16 years learning exactly how to keep his composure in an emergency, and who is now applying every ounce of that same discipline to not walking back into economy himself. He does not need to. Rosalind and Odalise, standing beside the supervisor, provide detailed statements, corroborated by no fewer than 5 passenger witnesses, the off-duty paramedic's medical assessment, and the operations supervisor's own review of the cabin footage several passengers have already, unbidden, offered to share. Priscilla Dunmore is asked, politely but firmly, to remain in her seat until every other passenger has deplaned, and as the aircraft empties around her, row by row, passenger after passenger throwing her the same look of open disgust on their way up the aisle, she sits increasingly small in seat 9B, the very seat where this entire catastrophe began, waiting for whatever comes next. What comes next arrives in the form of 2 airport police officers boarding the now nearly empty aircraft, along with the same operations supervisor, tablet in hand, incident report already substantially filled out. Priscilla attempts one final, weak defense, insisting the whole thing was a simple accident blown out of proportion. But the supervisor informs her, flatly, that regardless of intent, causing injury to an unaccompanied minor through documented negligence, compounded by her subsequent refusal to cooperate and her repeated attempts to shift blame onto a 6-year-old child, will result in an immediate and permanent flight ban across the airline's network, and that given the severity of the child's burn and her status as an unaccompanied minor under the airline's direct duty of care, the matter is being formally referred both to airport authorities and to the family for further legal consideration. Priscilla, hearing the words legal consideration, goes pale in a way that no amount of sunglasses or bravado can disguise, and is escorted off the aircraft in a silence far more damning than any shouting could have been. In the terminal, waiting near the jet bridge exit for entirely unrelated reasons, is a small group of Captain Cortland's fellow pilots, colleagues who happen to be crewing other flights through this exact diversion airport and who, upon hearing through the close-knit pilot grapevine what had happened, gathered instinctively at the gate the moment word spread, the same instinctive, unspoken loyalty that runs through any tight professional family when one of their own is in crisis. They do not make a scene. They simply stand, a quiet handful of captains and first officers in matching uniforms, waiting to see their colleague and his daughter safely off that aircraft. And when Cortland finally emerges carrying Maddie in his arms, her coffee-stained jacket still on, wings pin still crookedly attached, the group closes around them both without a word needing to be said, a wall of quiet solidarity that says everything. The following days bring the full weight of consequence crashing down on Priscilla, done more with the specific, unstoppable velocity of a story that combines an injured child, a beloved captain, and unmistakable, damning footage already circulating across every platform. The airline's legal and communications teams, facing a viral incident with overwhelming documented evidence, move quickly. A permanent no-fly designation is issued. A formal statement is released praising Captain Cortland's professionalism and his crew's swift, compassionate response, and a private settlement conversation begins between the airline's legal department and the Cortland family regarding medical costs and damages. Handled quietly, respectfully, entirely outside the media glare that has already made Priscilla's face and full name a matter of public record across a dozen news outlets covering the diversion. Comment sections fill overnight with outrage on Maddie's behalf, with strangers offering to send gifts, with parents recounting their own worst travel days and finding, in this story, both horror and unexpected comfort in watching consequences land exactly where they belonged. Maddie herself recovers within 2 weeks, the burn healing cleanly under a pediatrician's care, though she keeps the coffee-stained jacket, wings pin and all, refusing to let her father throw it away, telling him, with the particular clear-eyed logic of a 6-year-old, that the stain is proof of the day he came out of the cockpit for her, and that she wants to remember that, not the woman who spilled it. Captain Cortland returns to flying within the month, his fellow pilots and crew rallying around him and his daughter with the specific tenderness reserved for families within families. And the airline, in the wake of the incident, quietly reviews and strengthens its unaccompanied minor protocols, adding an explicit provision allowing crew discretion to relocate a minor away from a disruptive adjacent passenger immediately upon any complaint or incident, without requiring supervisor approval. First, a policy change industry insiders will come to refer to informally as Maddie's Rule. Priscilla Dunmore, for her part, becomes exactly the cautionary tale nobody wants to be. Her name permanently associated online with the story of the woman who scalded a 6-year-old and then blamed the child for it. Banned for life from an airline she once claimed loyalty to, facing a formal legal matter regarding the injury, and, according to later reporting, quietly asked to leave more than one social gathering back home once acquaintances recognized her from the footage. She loses, in the space of a single viral week, whatever fragile sense of grievance and entitlement she had built her whole personality around, replaced instead by the very public, very permanent knowledge that some accidents reveal exactly who a person really is underneath, and the world, this time, was watching. And so the story that began with a paper cup of coffee spilled across a small denim jacket at 31,000 feet ends months later with a captain who once had to choose, in the space of a single second, between the discipline of the cockpit and the instinct of a father, and who found a way to honor both, with a little girl who kept the very jacket that hurt her as proof of the day her dad came running, and with a woman who learned, in front of 160 strangers and eventually, the entire internet, that blaming a child for your own carelessness is a mistake the world does not forgive quietly. If the story moved you, if you believe every child deserves someone willing to leave the cockpit for them, share it with someone who needs the reminder and stay close, because somewhere out there, another flight is climbing toward cruising altitude right now. Another passenger is about to make a mistake they cannot take back, and karma, as it always does, is already fastening its seatbelt for the ride.